The 1980s gave us slashers, sequels, and studio blockbusters, but the real treasures often lurked in the shadows of the video store. These weren't polished productions with glossy marketing campaigns. No, these were the oddballs, the midnight gems, the films that looked cheap but burned themselves into your brain forever. So let me ask you this. How many of these unforgettable B-horror flicks have you actually seen? Don't be so sure, you might be surprised. 1. The Boogens, 1981. Imagine renting a quiet cabin in the mountains only to discover that underground tunnels are crawling with something hungry. That's the Boogens, a small-budget creature feature that refuses to play it safe. Directed by James L. Conway, it opens with miners accidentally unleashing long-buried monsters while expanding a series of caves. From there, it's classic setup. Friends on vacation, creepy atmosphere, and a menace that lurks where flashlights barely reach. What makes the Boogens so special isn't groundbreaking effects or big-name stars. It's mood. The film leans into the claustrophobic dread of being underground, where you're never sure if that rustle in the dark is just shifting rocks or something with teeth. And when the monsters do appear, they're gloriously rubbery, tentacled nightmares that feel like they crawled straight out of a pulp magazine illustration. Released at a time when slashers were taking over, the Boogens stuck out as an old-school monster movie with new VHS life. It didn't make much noise in theaters, but it became a cult favorite on late-night cable and dusty rental shelves. Horror fans who stumbled on it usually remembered one thing. Its atmosphere lingered long after the credits rolled. So if you're craving a throwback to when horror still loved lurking in caves and tunnels, the Boogens deserves its revival. It's proof that sometimes all you need for a memorable scare is a dark hole in the ground and the suggestion that something's waiting for you down there. Second, Basket Case, 1982. Few films from the 80s embody the phrase, "You've got to see it to believe it," quite like Basket Case. Written and directed by Frank Henenlotter, it tells the story of Dwayne, a soft-spoken guy who wanders the sleazy streets of New York with a mysterious wicker basket. Inside is his twin brother Belial, a grotesque, malformed creature with a grudge. Together, they check into a rundown motel and begin a bizarre mission of revenge. Shot for almost no money, Basket Case is grimy, raw, and unapologetically weird. New York in the early 80s becomes more than just a backdrop. It's practically a character itself. Trash-lined alleys, neon-lit dive bars, and sketchy hotel rooms all ooze with atmosphere. Belial, meanwhile, is brought to life with a mix of puppetry and stop-motion effects that look rough, but that roughness is exactly what gives him his nightmarish charm. What makes the film unforgettable is its audacity. Most low-budget horrors try to hide their limitations, but Basket Case embraces them, creating a surreal experience where reality feels slightly warped. It plays like a grindhouse fairy tale if fairy tales were set on 42nd Street and involved shrieking mutant creatures. While critics dismissed it as exploitation trash, audiences passed it around like a secret. It became a VHS sensation, and for many horror fans, it was the movie you dared your friends to watch. The film's influence carried far beyond the 80s, spawning 2 sequels and cementing Henenlotter's reputation as a king of New York's underground horror. To this day, when horror fans talk about the strangest movies they ever rented, Basket Case almost always makes the list. And once you've seen Belial's scream, you never forget it. 3. Alone in the Dark, 1982. Before the slasher craze fully consumed the decade, Alone in the Dark arrived with a different kind of menace. Killers who weren't masked strangers, but recognizable Hollywood faces. Directed by Jack Shoulder, this film pits Donald Pleasance, Martin Landau, and Jack Palance against a group of ordinary townsfolk after a blackout lets dangerous psychiatric patients loose. It begins in a supposedly secure asylum where Dr. Leo Bain, played by Pleasance, runs things with a peculiar brand of calm. But when the power fails, the balance tips, and several of the most volatile patients break free. Unlike slashers that hinge on one silent stalker, Alone in the Dark gives us a group of distinct villains, each unhinged in a different way. Landau's character is a pyromaniac preacher. Palance radiates quiet intimidation, and together they form a trio that feels terrifyingly unpredictable. The film thrives on tension rather than bloodshed. Yes, there are kills, but what sticks with you is the creeping realization that no one is safe once the lights go out. The suburban setting, ordinary homes and neighborhoods, becomes a hunting ground, and the movie asks a question scarier than any masked killer. What if society's fragile order vanished in an instant? While it didn't make waves theatrically, the cast alone earned it cult recognition. Watching actors of this caliber dive headfirst into B-horror chaos is a rare treat, and their performances elevate what could have been forgettable into something genuinely unnerving. Today, Alone in the Dark feels like a time capsule from when horror could still surprise you with who showed up and what risks it took. It might not be as loud as the slashers that followed, but it casts a shadow all its own. 4. The Slayer, 1982. Not every B-horror from the 80s played it for cheap thrills. Some went for atmosphere, weaving dread through every frame. The Slayer is one of those films. Directed by J.S. Cardone, it follows two couples vacationing on a remote island, hoping for rest but finding only nightmares. One of the women, plagued by recurring dreams of a monster, realizes her visions might not be dreams at all. They might be warnings. The setting is its secret weapon. Empty beaches, abandoned houses, and howling winds paint the island as a place that was never meant to be inhabited. It feels cut off from the world, a perfect stage for terror. Unlike many slashers of the early 80s, The Slayer doesn't race toward kills. It takes its time, layering unease until the boundaries between dream and reality blur. And then there's the creature. Rarely seen in full, it's more suggested than showcased, but when it strikes, the makeup effects hit hard. The kills are brutal and creative, proving that even on a limited budget, imagination could deliver chills. More than gore, though, it's the concept that lingers, a personal nightmare bleeding into reality. At the time, The Slayer struggled to stand out against flashier competitors. But on home video, it found an audience drawn to its eerie pacing and surreal quality. Fans of psychological horror discovered it was more than just another masked killer outing. It was a mood piece, a storm of paranoia wrapped in monster movie clothing. Revisiting it now, you'll notice how it foreshadows dream-based horrors that came later, from Nightmare on Elm Street to modern indie creepers. The Slayer isn't loud or showy, but it haunts in its own quiet, relentless way. 5. Deadly Spawn, 1983. If there was ever proof that passion could outshine budget, it's Deadly Spawn. Shot in New Jersey on a shoestring, this alien invasion flick doesn't waste time with slow build-ups. Within minutes, meteorites crash, basement doors creak, and slimy creatures with endless rows of teeth are chomping their way through a suburban family home. The plot is straightforward. Alien spawn arrive, they're hungry, and humans are on the menu. But where Deadly Spawn earns its cult crown is in its effects. These aren't Hollywood creations. They're handcrafted, blood-soaked puppets built by enthusiastic amateurs who poured every cent into making them as gruesome and convincing as possible. And it works. The monsters, especially the towering multi-jawed mother spawn, look terrifying in their lo-fi glory. What really sells the film is its commitment. Instead of hiding the creatures in shadows, the camera lingers, showing them in broad daylight as they shred victims. For a film this low budget, that level of confidence is rare, and it's exactly why fans latched onto it. You weren't just watching another monster movie, you were witnessing backyard creativity pushed to its absolute limits. Critics at the time dismissed it as cheap splatter, but horror fans passed it around like a badge of honor. It became one of those movies whispered about at conventions and sought after on VHS. Its reputation only grew, influencing other DIY horror projects by proving that you didn't need Hollywood's backing to make something unforgettable. To this day, Deadly Spawn stands tall among the most beloved creature features of the decade. It's scrappy, relentless, and unapologetically fun. If you love horror that wears its handmade heart on its sleeve, this is one you can't miss. 6. Curtains, 1983. Few slashers of the 80s had a production history as messy as Curtains, and yet out of that chaos came one of the most memorable oddities of the era. Shot in Canada but marketed heavily in the States, this icy thriller follows a group of actresses invited to a secluded mansion to audition for a demanding director. Soon enough, the casting couch becomes a killing ground, with someone in a porcelain hag mask picking off the hopefuls. What makes Curtains unforgettable is its mood. Instead of the neon-soaked fun of typical slashers, it leans on dread and isolation. The standout moment, the infamous ice skating sequence, still gives horror fans chills. Imagine a lone skater gliding across a frozen lake, the crunch of her blades echoing in the stillness, only to see a masked figure gliding toward her with a sickle. It's the kind of scene that etches itself into your memory. The behind-the-scenes turmoil is almost as legendary as the film itself. Multiple directors, rewrites, and long production delays left it uneven, with shifts in tone and pacing. But those rough edges give it a surreal, dreamlike quality. You're never entirely sure what's intentional and what's accident, and that uncertainty works in its favor. Though largely ignored during its release, Curtains found new life on VHS and later DVD. Fans began celebrating its weird energy and eerie imagery. It might not be polished, but it proves that sometimes a film's imperfections can make it scarier. When horror fans argue about underrated slashers, Curtains is almost always skating into the conversation. 7. Mountaintop Motel Massacre, 1983/1986. Don't let the sleepy title fool you. Mountaintop Motel Massacre is anything but restful. Shot in Louisiana in 1983, but not widely released until 1986, it tells the story of Evelyn, an unhinged motel owner who turns her rundown property into a death trap for unsuspecting guests. What sets this one apart is its tone. It's not flashy, it's not fast, it's grimy, unsettling, and eerily quiet. The motel itself is the star. A maze of dingy rooms connected by hidden crawl spaces, it feels alive, like the building itself is conspiring against anyone foolish enough to check in. Evelyn, played with unnerving restraint by Anna Chappelle, spends most of the film creeping through these passages, peering into rooms, and waiting for the right moment to strike. The kills are rough, but what sticks with you is the sense of intrusion, that feeling of being watched when you think you're alone. Unlike the glossier slashers of the mid-'80s, Mountaintop Motel Massacre thrives on atmosphere rather than gore. It plays almost like an American cousin to European art horror, but stripped of the polish. The camera lingers on peeling wallpaper, flickering bulbs, and the slow shuffle of Evelyn as she stalks her prey. It's unsettling in a way that bigger-budget films rarely manage. Ignored in theaters, it eventually found its audience on VHS, where late-night viewers embraced its unsettling energy. Critics dismissed it as too slow, too strange, but for horror fans looking for something different, it became a hidden gem. Today, Mountaintop Motel Massacre stands as proof that the scariest monsters don't always wear masks. They might just be the lonely person running the front desk. 8. Night of the Comet, 1984. Few B-horror films capture the neon-soaked vibe of the 80s like Night of the Comet. Equal parts science fiction, comedy, and end-of-the-world thriller, it follows two Valley Girl sisters who wake up after a cosmic event to discover most of humanity has been reduced to dust, or worse, turned into flesh-hungry mutants. Think shopping malls, cheerleaders, and zombies all mixed into one glittery apocalypse. Directed by Tom Eberhardt, it stands out for its sharp writing and female leads. Reggie and Sam, played by Catherine Mary Stewart and Kelly Maroney, aren't damsels waiting for rescue. They're resourceful, funny, and capable of handling machine guns just as easily as snarky one-liners. At a time when horror often reduced women to victims, Night of the Comet flipped the script, giving audiences heroines who owned the screen. Visually, the film is unforgettable. The city bathed in eerie red light, empty streets littered with abandoned cars, and shopping malls echoing with silence. It feels both surreal and oddly familiar, like a nightmare version of everyday life. And then there are the mutants, who aren't just mindless monsters, but tragic reminders of what people became after the comet's pass. Though it only did modest business in theaters, Night of the Comet exploded on home video, where its mix of camp and charm won over fans. Today, it's often cited as a forerunner to the girl power movement in horror, paving the way for stronger female protagonists in the years to come. If you've ever wanted a film that combines Saturday morning cartoon energy with late-night horror thrills, this is it. Night of the Comet is proof that even the apocalypse can be stylish. 9. The Mutilator, 1984. Sometimes a movie doesn't need polish, it just needs guts. The Mutilator delivers exactly that. Directed by Buddy Cooper, this seaside slasher opens with a shocking accident and then jumps to a group of college kids heading to a beach house for a weekend getaway. What follows is one of the goriest, most infamous B-horrors of the decade. From the outset, you know, the Mutilator isn't aiming for subtlety. The tagline alone, by sword, by pick, by axe, by, sets the tone. What it lacks in acting finesse, it more than makes up for in outrageous practical effects. The kills are staged with grim creativity, including one particularly stomach-turning moment that cemented the film's cult status among gorehounds. Shot in North Carolina on a shoestring, it, on a IR, feels amateurish at times, but that rawness adds to its charm. You can sense the filmmakers were swinging for the fences, determined to make their mark in a crowded slasher market. The beach setting, with its windswept docks and echoing boat sheds, adds a chilly, almost melancholy layer that gives the film more personality than many of its peers. Initially overlooked, The Mutilator found its following through word of mouth and VHS rentals. It became one of those "Have you seen this?" titles passed between fans eager to shock their friends. Critics dismissed it as trash, but in horror circles, trash sometimes means treasure. Today, it remains one of the defining deep cuts of 80s slashers. Rough around the edges, soaked in fake blood, and unforgettable once you've seen it, The Mutilator earns its place on this list. Ghoulies, 1985. If you rented movies in the 80s, chances are you remember the Ghoulies VHS cover, a slimy green creature peeking out of a toilet with a mischievous grin. That image alone convinced thousands of kids to grab it off the shelf, often without their parents' approval. The movie inside might not live up to the marketing genius, but it became a cult staple nonetheless. Directed by Luca Bercovici, Ghoulies follows a young man who inherits a creepy old house, and through a mix of curiosity and bad decisions, unleashes a pack of mischievous creatures. Unlike Gremlins, which blended horror and comedy with Hollywood finesse, Ghoulies dives headfirst into camp. The monsters are rubbery puppets with wild designs, ranging from creepy cute to outright ridiculous, and they steal every scene they're in. The human storyline involving occult experiments and possession is secondary. Let's be honest, audiences came for the monsters, and the monsters delivered. Whether they were popping out of shadows, trashing rooms, or pulling that infamous bathroom gag, the Ghoulies had personality. What's remarkable is how much of an impact marketing alone had. Even though critics trashed it and its budget was modest, the poster art and clever VHS placement turned it into a rental juggernaut. Kids whispered about the toilet monster movie, and parents rolled their eyes while reluctantly paying the rental fee. The film's success spawned multiple sequels, each more outrageous than the last. While none reached the heights of their poster promises, they kept the brand alive throughout the decade. Today, Ghoulies stands as a reminder that sometimes hype is just as powerful as content. It might not be a masterpiece, but for an entire generation, that green monster's grin was impossible to forget. Elefte Spookies, Nitten Odyssex. If ever there was a B horror stitched together with duct tape and sheer desperation, it's Spookies. What began as one movie got hijacked mid-production, reshot with different actors, and edited into a Frankenstein's monster of a film. The result? A haunted house free-for-all filled with every creature effect the filmmakers could dream up. The plot, if you can call it that, centers on a group of partiers who stumble into an abandoned mansion. From there, the film throws everything at the wall: muck monsters, spider women, grim reapers, farting swamp creatures, you name it, it's in here. Continuity doesn't matter. Logic doesn't matter. What matters is the wild parade of practical effects, each more bizarre than the last. Watching Spookies feels like flipping through a horror comic while someone adds random scribbles on each page. It shouldn't work, and technically it doesn't, but that's why it's unforgettable. The sheer audacity of mashing so many monsters into one film gives it a fever dream quality. It's not polished horror, it's chaotic imagination run amok. Initially dismissed as a mess, Spookies found new life among collectors who appreciated its eccentricity. Bootleg VHS tapes circulated for years before official releases finally let wider audiences experience its madness. Today, it has a loyal cult following that celebrates its flaws as features. If you've ever wondered what would happen if a haunted house movie and a creature feature got stuck in a blender, Spookies is your answer. It's confusing, ridiculous, and completely one of a kind. 12th. Chopping Mall, 1986. Few B-horrors scream 80s quite like Chopping Mall. Take a suburban shopping mall, lock in a group of teens overnight, and unleash killer security robots armed with lasers. Yes, it's as absurd as it sounds, and that's exactly why it's legendary. Directed by Jim Wynorski, the film follows a simple formula. 4 couples sneak into the mall for an after-hours party, only to discover the newly installed protector robots have gone haywire. Instead of guarding the stores, they start hunting the kids, zapping them with laser beams, and tossing out the occasional sarcastic one-liner. What makes Chopping Mall pop is how gleefully it embraces its premise. The mall setting is a time capsule of 80s consumerism, arcades, neon signs, furniture showrooms, and turning that shiny world into a battlefield feels both silly and subversive. Watching teens fight robots with makeshift weapons scavenged from stores is pure midnight movie joy. The kills are over the top, with the most famous being a head explosion courtesy of a robot's laser, a scene that became the movie's calling card. The effects are cheap but creative, and the pacing is brisk enough to keep the energy high from start to finish. While critics rolled their eyes, audiences loved it on VHS. The combination of robots, malls, and camp humor made it a repeat rental for years. Today, it's celebrated as one of the quintessential, so bad it's brilliant cult films of the decade. If you ever wanted proof that the 80s could make horror out of literally anything, even shopping malls, Chopping Mall delivers in spades. 13. Blood Diner, 1987. How do you follow up a notorious 60s gore flick like Blood? Feast by making it even wilder, funnier, and stranger. Jackie Kong's Blood Diner is part horror, part comedy, and part parody of everything the genre had become by the late 80s. It's messy, offensive in spots, but undeniably unforgettable. The story follows 2 brothers who inherit a diner and a family tradition of serving up more than just burgers and fries. 14th Slaughterhouse, 1987. Backwoods slashers were a dime a dozen in the 80s, but Slaughterhouse carved out its own niche with buckets of atmosphere and a hulking killer named Buddy. Directed by Rick Roessler, the film follows a corrupt town council trying to shut down an old slaughterhouse. The owner and his mentally challenged son respond the only way horror villains know how, by turning the meat hooks on the intruders. The setting does half the work. Filmed in a real slaughterhouse, the movie drenches every scene in rust, grime and the constant threat of sharp metal. The clanging of chains, the squeal of equipment, and the sheer claustrophobia of the environment give it a grit that no set designer could fake. Buddy, the killer, isn't a silent masked figure, but a grunting, pig-like brute whose physical presence dominates the film. His father, barking orders and justifying their crimes, adds a disturbing dynamic that makes the pair feel more unsettling than the average slasher villain. The kills are grisly, but it's the vibe that lingers. This isn't glossy horror. It's dirty, mean, and relentless. Released at the tail end of the slasher boom, it didn't get the attention of bigger titles, but VHS fans latched onto its raw edge. Over time, Slaughterhouse gained a cult reputation as one of the decade's most effective regional slashers. It might not reinvent the wheel, but it makes sure that wheel is covered in blood and rolling downhill fast. 15th Jack-o'-lantern, 1988. Every horror fan knows the classics tied to Halloween, but few have stumbled across Jack-o'-lantern, a late 80s oddity that feels like it was dreamed up during a headbanger's fever dream. Directed by Jag Mundra, the film mixes cults, family drama, and heavy metal concert footage into one bizarre package. The story follows a young man raised by his sinister grandfather, who just might be grooming him for something dark. On Halloween night, the tension boils over as reality and nightmare blur. Instead of a straightforward slasher, the film dips into surreal territory with strange dream sequences, inexplicable cutaways, and random detours into music video territory. What makes it unforgettable isn't coherence, it's spectacle. One moment you're watching a masked killer, the next you're staring at a full-blown rock performance complete with smoke machines and spandex. The film feels like it was made up as it went along, but that randomness gives it an unshakable charm. Released straight to video, Jack-o'-lantern barely registered on the radar in 1988. But for fans who discovered it, the mix of Halloween imagery and rock show energy made it a cult favorite. It's not scary in the traditional sense, but it's wildly entertaining for anyone who loves horror oddities that color outside every line. Today, it's the kind of movie you show friends at midnight when you want them to ask, "What on earth are we watching?" And isn't that what B-horror is all about? So, there you have it, 15 unforgettable B-horror gems from the 80s that prove the decade's weirdest monsters and wildest ideas didn't always come from Hollywood blockbusters. From killer robots to basement aliens, these films remind us that creativity often thrives on the margins. Which of these have you seen, and which are you daring enough to track down? Drop your favorites in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more deep dive horror madness.